Food. It is the most essential part of human existence aside from water. But when you are in the middle of nowhere, with only a vast ocean surrounding you, you probably expect to be eating a lot of fish. But what if we tell you that this is not the case? And your favorite steak? Well, that can be your meal of choice aboard a U.S. Navy destroyer. Yes, a ship like the USS Zumwalt, DDG-1000, is not just packed full of weapons and other military weapons, but also houses a crew of almost 160 personnel. And all these crew members need to be fed at least 3 times daily, according to U.S. law. Today, we uncover the fascinating world of the warship kitchen, a small space aboard a U.S. destroyer, responsible for feeding every sailor serving Uncle Sam. This is how U.S. Navy destroyer ships feed 300 sailors in the middle of the ocean. According to the United States Navy, a basic allowance for subsistence, or BAS program, is often used to determine exactly how much funding the ship gets to spend on meals for crew members. This works out at around $15 per sailor per day that is allocated to the Navy in order to ensure that every person aboard received 3 meals. For a standard destroyer, which holds between 150 and 300 crew members, it could be $4,500 per day to feed the entire crew. This seems like quite a lot of money, but go to your local supermarket and see how much food you can buy for $15 each day. While you can pick up a couple of ramen noodles and other quick meals, the Navy requires something with a little more substance. These sailors need to hit their macronutritional targets each day to ensure optimal levels of energy and help them to productively complete their daily tasks. So, serving sailors some frozen pizza or ramen noodles might not be really conducive to ensuring each person is fed with enough nutrition to meet their daily needs. This is where the Navy often brokers deals with food supply companies. These companies are responsible for delivering the food and making sure they offer it to the Navy at an affordable price. But with the current increase in food prices, this number might be slightly higher in 2025. Moreover, the Navy also hires culinary professionals, or cooks as they are often called, to prepare these meals. Yes, everything is prepared from scratch, which means that cooks will need to put in a lot of work and effort. But we'll get to that in just a second. Surprisingly, the U.S. military only recommends that soldiers get between 1,100 and 1,400 calories per day, to keep this below 1,500. However, this only applies to days the soldier is active, and they might receive a little more on off days to help replenish energy reserves. However, getting a 500-calorie meal 3 times per day might not be enough given the strenuous circumstances these sailors need to endure, which is why this number is occasionally bumped up to 1,600 calories. But calories are not the main factor when it comes to food. By eating a single $10 McDonald's meal, you can easily reach 2,000 calories in a single sitting, but it doesn't contain any of the nutritional value that a sailor might need. So, the Navy often focuses on giving soldiers nutrition-dense meals, which keeps the calories low. One main reason for this is to ensure that sailors never feel too full to work or become lethargic. Essentially, sailors should remain in a state of alertness for as long as possible. But how are these food sources procured, and what happens when the mission extends beyond the initial stock that has been supplied? Let's start with the numbers first. While these vary depending on the size of the vessel, the average destroyer needs about 1,600 pounds of chicken, 350 pounds of lettuce, 160 gallons of milk, and 30 boxes of cereal just to get through a single day of feeding 300 sailors. But the exact numbers depend on various factors, including the number of people on board, how long the deployment will last, and most importantly, the available storage space on the vessel. The Zumwalt-class destroyers are currently the largest in the U.S. fleet, meaning they automatically get a little more food. But getting food for the ship is not as simple as popping into Walmart and buying some food. As we mentioned earlier, the U.S. Navy works with various suppliers to make sure that enough food is procured. A few days before the deployment, these boxes of food will arrive. They will be packed on the vessel, usually below the deck in refrigerated rooms. Unlike submarines who store food in the compartments where sailors sleep, the USS Zumwalt has enough room for storing foods and other additional supplies. Procurement takes place months ahead of time to ensure that everything arrives on time, but it must arrive as fresh as possible to extend the storage life on the ocean. Determining exactly what will be needed comes down to the Food Service Management, or FSM program, which determines exactly what soldiers will be eating aboard the vessel. The program itself is ideal for tracking inventory stock, but also allows cooks to plan different menus. Yes, unlike many other military facilities, cooks aboard naval vessels often have the freedom to create the meals they believe are the best. This significantly helps in ensuring that there is enough for every sailor and helps the food storage last for as long as possible. Unfortunately, these will never last a full deployment, especially when the Navy is at sea for 5 to 6 months. So, much like the aircraft carriers, resupply missions run quite often to help replenish supplies. But how do these resupply missions work? Food, and specifically fresh food, only has a temporary shelf life. Despite the Navy having a little more storage on destroyers than many other vessels, they can only carry so much fresh food. Eventually, the meat will go bad, and this cannot be served to active sailors. So, the initial deployment only carries a few thousand pounds of food that will last about a month at sea. However, you need to keep in mind that these vessels rarely, if ever, travel alone, and when an entire fleet works together, they often need to be resupplied frequently. Thankfully, the U.S. Navy has this sorted with something called UNREP, or Underway Resupply. This enables the vessels to be resupplied while they are floating, which generally happens at least once a month. But the frequency could change depending on ship capacity and deployment length. Once a month, a resupply mission is launched. It starts from a U.S. base located close to where the destroyer is operating. Food or supplies are flown into the base and then loaded on various supply ships. These ships meet up with the destroyers in the middle of the ocean. High-tension cables are then connected between both vessels, which will be used to shift food from one vessel to the other. However, certain supplies can be a little heavy, and moving them with high-tension cables can be a recipe for disaster. Since many of these vessels also have an emergency helicopter aboard, these choppers usually kick into action. They will shift between the two vessels, lifting heavy supplies and dropping them on the desired destination. Essentially, these kinds of missions are just as deadly as the actual mission the destroyer might be on. Since these resupply vessels are the only things standing between starvation and successful deployment, the Navy spares no expense in protecting them. A cruiser or submarine will often be deployed to lead the fleet until it safely delivers the supplies to the various vessels. But once everything is on board, it takes quite a big effort to prepare 1,500 meals for the 300 sailors now looking forward to a fresh dinner or breakfast. Well, a U.S. destroyer is set up very similar to other naval vessels. Located below the deck is what is known as the galley, or the kitchen in simple terms. Numerous cooks will operate in this small space, and their only mission is to ensure that soldiers are fed. But this is not like a prison where meals get prepared and then simply just dished up for sailors. The United States actually has a few set menus, and sailors get to choose their meals from these menus. Since they operate a cafeteria-style dining setup, sailors can choose any one of these available meals for the day. Yes, it might not be the same menu that you get when visiting a restaurant, but it means that everyone can eat something different each day. Unfortunately, these meals are not cooked when they are ordered, but cooks prepare them well ahead of time, as cooking 1,500 meals to order will be impossible in such a small kitchen. In fact, these cooks wake up at 3 a.m. each morning before heading to the galley. Once they enter and make sure everything is clean, the food preparation starts. Cooks determine which menus will be available for the day before informing crew members. These ingredients are prepared, and the process of cooking also starts. By the time the first crew members pop in for meals at around 6 a.m., everything is ready to go, and they can simply just give their orders. Instead of waiting the standard 20-minute waiting period you have to endure at your favorite restaurant, these meals are simply just dished up and served to the sailor. It saves everyone a lot of time, and since the galley is small, it offers every sailor the opportunity to have a quick meal before starting their shift. But once the first group of sailors has been fed, it doesn't mean the cooks will now be relieved. Since this process can take a couple of hours, the first meals could only end by 10 or 11 a.m. At this point, everything needs to be cleaned, and the cooks have to start preparing for lunch. This means that following breakfast, culinary members of the crew will immediately move on to cooking the next meal. By the time they finish, it is already midday, and sailors again flood the dining area expecting to be fed. Once lunch is over, the exact same process needs to happen again for dinner, while the same cooks who woke up at 3 a.m. are still busy cooking. This is where sailors often complain about working for 12 to 16 hours, and no one truly appreciates them. In fact, many former Navy veterans have come out suggesting that cooks aboard naval vessels are some of the most underappreciated assets. But these are not just mere cooks brought in for the sake of cooking meals. Much like military doctors and dentists, these cooks are also trained soldiers, or naval officers in this case. They are still combat ready and will need to go into combat when called upon. By the time dinner is finished, the cooks can often get off duty, and many will return to the sleeping quarters where they will get a good night's rest before doing the same thing the next day. On some of the bigger vessels, you often have more than one galley, since so many people cannot eat at the same time. Having a second galley and dining hall means more sailors can be fed in a shorter amount of time. Each kitchen will have their own pair of cooks, and they will only be responsible for the section of the ship in which they operate. However, safety standards and scrutiny about excessive working hours have been a big criticism of the Navy. Many of these sailors work almost 16 hours, and this can be seen as absolutely ridiculous when it goes on for months. So, to combat this, many naval vessels rely on shifts, where they allow cooks to work in 8 or 10-hour shifts. As soon as one crew finishes, the other will pick up, but the galley is closed during the evening hours, forcing sailors who are hungry to search elsewhere. This is where the next part of the story kicks in. Recently, the United States Navy has begun adding another facility to the naval vessels, but this facility has only a single purpose, which is to improve the quality of life for sailors. Ship stores, as they are often referred to, hold essential items such as toiletries, snacks, drinks, and even essential electronics. In fact, losing your mobile charger at sea can be detrimental, but when you have a shop, you can replace it. It becomes a big quality of life upgrade. Now, these stores are nothing like your local supermarkets, and you should not expect to see anything even close to a Walmart. Some of the most essential items you'll find aboard the ship store are chips, drinks like Monster and Red Bull for those long shifts, and essential toiletry items such as toothpaste and deodorant. But sailors like the ramen noodle section, which serves as a supplement when sailors don't enjoy the specific meals they've been fed from the galley. Whenever sailors work late shifts and they miss meals, this also serves as the ideal stop to replenish some much-needed calories. But everything is pretty basic in the store, and one downside to this is the actual popularity of them. Only a handful of people can enter the small confines of this location at any one time, often leading to long queues being formed on the outside. Nevertheless, it is a great opportunity for sailors to engage in some conversation before buying what they need and heading to the privacy of the sleeping areas. Unfortunately, these stores cannot be manned 24/7, which has meant that those working during the operating hours might miss out on the opportunity to grab a quick snack. Fortunately, Uncle Sam has come up with something extra that can significantly boost the productivity of such a small shop. The new self-checkout system works a treat. Now, the store can be unmanned, and sailors simply walk in and buy whatever they need. It also means the store can be open for the duration of the deployment. Well, aside from every couple of days when one sailor needs to come in and make sure all the shelves are fully restocked. Thanks to the Navy Exchange System, NEX, everything operates using a card. Funds can be loaded onto the card, and it will be used when paying for your meals. This is contrary to eating from the kitchen, where you are guaranteed 3 meals a day and don't need to pay a cent. However, paying for your snacks on a U.S. destroyer is not such a bad thing. These funds are not used for profit, and they can all be collected in the ship's recreational fund. The fund itself provides sailors with more quality of life items, especially for recreational purposes. Movie nights and games are not usually what you'd expect to see on a warship, but the Navy needs something to keep these soldiers entertained. Moreover, products are only slightly marked up, and the Navy also buys wholesale, which means they get regular discounts on some of these goodies. You are also likely to only see U.S. products on the shelves to ensure that local businesses remain fully supported. As for the restocking of these supplies, well, they follow the same resupply missions that the rest of the ship does. Unfortunately, shop items are rarely prioritized, and when it comes to saving space for essential equipment, your favorite snack might be out of stock for quite a while. But the Navy has taken this one step further in recent developments. The USS Boxer LHD-4 and USS Carl Vinson currently have a Starbucks on board. Unfortunately, these are not your standard coffee shops where you can sit down and have a coffee with a mate, but rather just a little taste of home. Moreover, these shops don't have every item you might want and will mostly serve the most popular items on the Starbucks menu. They usually resemble a standard hot dog stand you'd see on the corner of every street in New York, but this gives sailors a little taste of home. So, why is this important to the Navy? And does it really even matter to the soldiers to have these extra facilities? According to the U.S. Navy, the average deployment for a destroyer is between 6 and 9 months. But as we have previously mentioned, these vessels rarely operate alone and often make up large fleets, usually to protect aircraft carriers. Since this means a sailor is away from their family for the better part of the year, morale can quickly go down. In fact, sailors need to stay motivated instead of just going through the motions. These shops are specifically introduced to allow sailors to get a little taste of what they have left behind in the United States. If you cannot see your family every day, at least eating something that brings back memories of home is great. Psychologists also believe that it reinforces the mission and allows sailors to see that the Navy actually cares about them, and they are not just soldiers being sacrificed and forgotten about when on deployment. Moreover, periods on the ocean are often boring. Yes, sailors might find it fun and interesting on a first deployment, but after a couple of weeks, it becomes rather boring, and sailors just go through the motions. Well, that is, unless you are traversing the Taiwan Strait, which is a high-tension area as of this video. But what about those sailors who have specialized dietary needs, religious, and medical needs? Not everyone is the same. And while someone might prefer a steak, the other person could be on a fully vegan diet. Since the Navy doesn't discriminate, they need to make sure that food standards adhere to whatever it is a person must eat. As we mentioned earlier, a specialized menu is almost akin to what you'd expect from a hospital. Cooks need to prepare meals for specific sailors depending on their needs, which means that at least one vegan option will always be available from the galley. Moreover, medical requirements are also followed, but the Navy usually doesn't need to deal with anything serious aside from allergies. Yes, sailors are screened and vetted before each deployment to ensure they will be able to successfully survive the deployment. If someone is suffering from serious medical complications, the likelihood of them even being on the vessels is extremely low. As for allergies, Well, these are usually special requests that the cooks need to deal with, can often be a real pain. However, it is necessary that each person gets the food they need to survive a 6-month stay aboard a U.S. destroyer. Medical specialists are also on board, and these active personnel are trained both in combat and medical efficiency. They will deal with problems regarding food or when someone does have an allergic reaction. Moreover, a sailor can be extracted and transported to a real hospital if something happens that requires them to do so. Essentially, every person with realistic demands will find that their stay aboard the vessels is made as comfortable as possible. Unfortunately, the small sleeping quarters might be something you never get used to. But at least these sailors don't need to cuddle up with a pack of canned baked beans, like those working aboard a submarine might need to. Moreover, the availability of fresh food is something sailors truly appreciate and keeps them in tip-top form, especially those who want to use the gym, which is present on some of the newer U.S. destroyers. So, is it worth spending time on a Navy destroyer? As great as all these amenities and menus sound, deployment aboard one of these vessels is nothing when compared to luxury cruise liners. It takes incredible mental fortitude and knowing that meals are the closest you'll come to home for up to 9 months. Many of these sailors often don't enjoy these missions, and working aboard such a vessel is not a walk in the park. U.S. destroyers are highly regimented, and unlike many other jobs, shifts run 24/7. In fact, there is always someone manning something, and this can take its toll. The Navy puts sailors through rigorous training, although many still make it aboard and then drop out after the first deployment. Fortunately, sailors are deployed every 18 to 24 months. This essentially means that after a 9-month stay at sea, you could spend up to a year or even more with family before setting out for your next mission. The Navy often rotates crews as well, meaning that the next time you serve, it might not be with the exact same sailors you did the first deployment. Active readiness drills and numerous exercises are also carried out during deployment missions. For example, the U.S. Navy and Philippines have recently conducted training drills, all aimed at keeping sailors in a state of alertness. Moreover, missions are often launched from the vessels, and while destroyers don't need to deal with the constant takeoff and landing as aircraft carriers, they still need to be combat ready whenever needed. Essentially, spending time aboard a U.S. destroyer is not for the faint of heart and will take a lot of mental fortitude to see out. There is absolutely no way to get off these ships, and you cannot ask to be transferred back home. However, there are situations where the Navy will make an exception. If something serious happens, like a medical emergency for someone back home, the military can grant a special leave of absence. But this doesn't mean the entire ship will turn around to drop someone off. As we have previously mentioned, many of these vessels also operate an emergency helicopter. If someone needs to get home quickly, the Navy could offer them a change of station. This can either be transferring the sailor to a vessel heading home, or they can be deployed to a special military base and phase out when these soldiers end their deployment. For example, if someone operating on the USS Harry S. Truman, currently stationed in the Red Sea, needs to get home, they could be transferred to Diego Garcia. This small U.S. and British base located in the Chagos archipelago constantly needs resupply, and numerous aircraft enter the base to deliver new supplies. If a sailor needs to get back home, they can easily board one of these vessels and quickly be transported back to the United States. However, this is only for very rare and exceptional circumstances. Once a sailor gets back home, it will be another 18 months before their next deployment, which begs the question of what exactly these sailors are up to during this period. Well, sailors need to remain in optimal shape, which means that training, generally done at a base, will need to be attended. Sailors might even work to earn a promotion in rank, and they will be tasked with normal day-to-day or administrative tasks. But this doesn't matter to someone who hasn't seen their family in a few months. So, even though adding many of these additions can be somewhat expensive for the Navy, it does keep sailors in the optimal mindset to make the best of their time aboard a Navy destroyer. So, do you think you'd be able to survive such a long stint away from home and without any real freedom? Let us know in the comments and make sure you are subscribed to our channel for everything military related.